so you guys are not going to Lanai on Maui on Monday. Where did you guys get it all switched over to go somewhere else?
Yeah, we're switching. We're going to Kauai now. So
Oh, okay.
kind of last minute deal. We didn't figure it out till Monday or Tuesday, but luckily we booked through a travel agent, so we just let her kind of take the reins on that and tell us what we needed to do.
Have you been to Kauai before or first time?
I haven't been to Hawaii at all before. Neither has my wife.
So we
So
just came back from Kauai in April. Very Poipu Beach would be the hangout that everybody goes down to, but
mhm.
that and definitely go see they got a Kauai coffee farm out there. It's like
Gotcha.
20, 30 minutes away, but yeah, we had a blast out there. It's probably our favorite island.
Really, had to check it out. We're excited. It was been a lot stressful 2 weeks. I'm sure that's nothing compared to what everybody else has been going through, but go out there and see how it is.
Well, I don't know, man. Maybe you can link up with Oprah and buy some land. I hear she owns like half of Maui now.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure there'll be a couple $1 million mansion out there.
Yeah, apparently the the town that got destroyed in the fire, the state has already made overtures that they're going to move in and go ahead and take that land. Um, so I'm not really sure how that works out with a Democratic governor. They're moving in to steal the people's land. I think we've heard that story somewhere before. Um, so I'll be interested to see how that works out and see what happens in the press.
And dude, did you see their emergency management director or whoever the heck he is? Like he quit, he resigned.
Oh yeah, the, yeah. He was not trained in emergency management. He wasn't. He wasn't trained in it. He wasn't an expert in it. And the first reason he said he didn't sound the sirens because those are tsunami sirens, and they didn't want anybody to run inland because people are stupid. They would just run into the fire, of course. You know,
I'm burning. I'm burning. Tom Cruise, help me.
but you're not dying from a tsunami. And I mean, granted, okay, so let's say people did hear that and they think tsunami. Maybe you could just have a different siren sound for, hey, there's a fire, there's a volcano erupting because they have those there. I'm pretty sure, read my history book, that's how Hawaii was formed. So fire is not out of the question on those islands, right? Um,
Well,
and
then he
lava
came
flows.
back and said it was because like we're at one with the water, and water isn't. We shouldn't be looking at water as like we use water. We are at one with water, so we just didn't want to waste the water on putting the fires out in your house and the 111
Right.
people that are dead. Whatever, dude.
One, I didn't want to use my fire extinguisher because I just bought it and it was under my kitchen sink, and I didn't want to use it on the fire because then I wouldn't have a fire extinguisher, right? I'd have to go buy a new one. So, yeah, that whole thing is crazy. That is absolutely insane. So, anyway,
So I
anyway,
guess we should address the elephant in the room. Obviously, Luke is not here. We had to bring two guests on to replace Luke. So that'll give Luke a big head. So, hopefully we'll get a 33% increase on viewership or whatever. But Josh, won't you introduce these two fine gentlemen on here?
all right, we'll do. Yeah, Luke. Luke couldn't join us because he's still in like week 4 of the dog adoption process. Apparently, it's a really busy process on a Saturday evening when you're adopting a dog that you've had for 3 weeks. So, all right, enough talking. Enough talking garbage about Luke bailing on us. So anyway, hey, Canteeners. So tonight for this episode, we have Brandon and Jarrett coming on. So both are loyal listeners, and you've heard us give them shout outs before on the podcast. So Brandon and Jarrett live out in the Midwest, and they are. I would say Brandon is in the in the farming business, and as is Jarrett. Although Brandon's out there doing the farming, and Jarrett's providing all the supplies that support that. And what we want to do is bring them on and just kind of get a rundown and the what's what on farming in the United States, and hopefully they can clear up some of the misconceptions that people have, and hopefully we got some questions for them and some topics for them to hit, but just kind of really give us a rundown on what it's like to be out there grinding on in the farming industry day in and day out. For us, we take a lot of things for granted. I get hungry, I go to the grocery store, and I just grab what's on the shelf,
A
and
lot.
whatever, dude. Hey, so Roger thinks I'm fat. Roger says I eat too much. So we go to the grocery store, we grab whatever's on the shelf, and a lot of people, and even me at times, we don't give too much consideration to how it got there. So how it got there is because of men like Brandon and Jarrett. That's how it got there. That's how it gets to the store for you to shove in your face. So Brandon, just kind of kick off with you. Kind of, how did you get? Let the listeners know. Obviously, I know, and Roger's got some background on it too. Me filling him in. But just kind of let the listeners know. Kind of, how did you get into the farming business, and kind of how long has your family been in the farming business there?
So I got into farming obviously because my family's been in it ever since I was a child. I'm the fifth generation on this homestead for farming. Um, so I mean, I guess it was just a family tradition that I'm lucky enough to get to continue. And uh,
Yeah. So now you guys do corn, soybean, and you guys have some cattle, correct?
yep, that's right. Yep. So we run, just like Josh said, we run corn, soybeans. My dad runs cattle. So I mean, we get to see each different facet of the agricultural world here in this area. That's the vast majority of what goes on right where we're at. You go out west and you start seeing some wheat, and you see a lot of cattle farms out west that's just strictly feedlots. But mostly what we do is all, as far as the cattle side, is all cow calf pair. So we just essentially keep kicking babies out year after year. We don't, and then we sell them. We don't feed them out. Um, so I'm not
Now you
sure.
guys you guys send some of your cattle off for your own consumption, right?
Yeah, so we have in the past couple years, we've kind of stopped feeding them out. We were sending them up to a feed lot where they'd take them at 800 pounds, feed them out till they're 12 to 1300, and then butcher them. But the cost with that got so high that it wasn't really making sense. So we'll pretty much just raise them up to 700, 800 pounds and sell them and let somebody else feed them out and pay for them to do that. Just because the inputs on the cattle side as well as the farming side have just gotten so great that that seems to be the more economic option for our farm.
So you said the cost went. What were some of the things driving the cost on that up?
Well, the biggest thing is, I mean, the cost of grain right now is high. Um, there's a lot of different factors driving that. It's mostly supply and demand. Uh,
Now, does most of your stuff stay local, or does it get shipped? And the cattle as well as the agriculture. Does most of that stay local, or does that get shipped around the country, or what's your distribution like on that?
so from the farmer to the grain elevator, it stays local. I mean, we're shipping our grain to an elevator 20 miles away, and a lot of that hops on a rail. And from there, to be honest with you, I'm not sure where it ends up. I know the vast majority of what I sell ends up at MGP Distillery, um, which is right there in
Oh
about
yeah.
20 miles from us. So
My man.
gets turned into some good bourbon real quick. Uh,
So, do
I
they at
love
least
it.
but
hook you up and like give you some bottles, or like, hey man, come take a tour? And
so they don't do that. But early on, we were getting Remus out here by the case. I mean, it was uh, nowhere else in the country could seem to hardly get it, and the local liquor store for 4 years after it was released was sitting on 4 or 5 cases of Remus 3, Remus 4, and it was wild. They shipped a whole ton of it out here, and then it got popular with Remus 5 and dried up after that.
so, Josh, you hear that? We need to tag MGP. Like, what the heck, man?
I know, right? Yeah. So I got a chance, on some of our vacations out to Brandon's place. Got a chance to ride along. in the semi to take it over to the grain elevator, and MGP is right there. And they had our last year, we were just out there. When we were out there, Brandon, it was June or July, one of the two.
Yeah, early July. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah, early July. We just come back from our cruise, and you know, got to go over to the elevator, and then yeah, MGP, so it's right next door, and they also make this vodka, and it's called Till Vodka, and it's pretty good. Even though Fred Minnick, the bourbon critic, said vodka sucks unless you're cleaning up dead cats. And there's a story, but there's a story that goes behind that. You'll have to go look on his YouTube channel for it. But they're going to discontinue Till Vodka. But it was kind of cool because the bottle was super cool. It had a farmer with an old school plow on it. So I thought that was pretty neat. But yeah, it's right there, and every time I see it, I always tell Brandon and his dad, be like, "Hey man, you guys keep growing it. I'm drinking it as fast as I can get my hands on it." So. So Brandon, so the cost got kind of high for cattle. So you're raising them. You said 700-800 pounds, and you're selling them off. Kind of, you've been in it, since, like you said, since you were a kid. How much have costs gone up? So break it down for the listeners. What does it cost? And I don't know if you guys break it down, cost per bushel or cost per acre, or how. And Jarrett, feel free to jump in, because there a large amount of that cost comes from obviously the fertilizer, and stuff that you deal in. So if you guys could just kind of break down like what's the cost per acre or bushel, or however you do it to to grow some corn, soybean.
Yeah, Brandon, you want me to take this one?
Yeah, go right ahead, and
Yeah.
I'll jump in if I need to.
Yeah, so I mean, the everyday of what I do is supply the inputs to growers like Brandon. So you've got costs, for seed, chemical, fertilizer, a bunch of different stuff, and it takes just a lot of different avenues of bringing that product in and delivering it to the grower. So, Brandon, I think this year, it's varied so much also just from, last year our inputs, for like anhydrous ammonia, which is, a major input that we use, you're looking at $1,300 a ton, and you're putting on, 200 pounds of that product actual. So you're really throwing about 250 on. So you might be $100 an acre for that. You might be, $100 an acre for P and K, which would be like your phosphate and potash. Chemicals can get, pretty expensive. You're looking at about $100 an acre there. Potentially, when you include fungicide and stuff like that. And then your seeds, kind of the same story. So I don't know what you kind of think, Brandon, but in that, you think it takes $600 to put a corn crop in per acre?
Yeah, I would say 600 is a pretty fair estimate in this area, and that's increased over the last, I would say, since 2020. I would say in 2020 we expected to spend around $400 an acre, and this year, we're 600 to 700. So pretty 50% increase, pretty substantial. It just, of course, the price of corn's gone up over the last couple of years, and that's been driving these high fertilizer prices because everybody's got to get theirs on it. So the fertilizer companies, of course, they see an opportunity to make a little more, so they go ahead and up the prices. We're making the same, maybe a little bit more money as we were when corn was $3. Corn, for examples, about $5 right now. It kind of fluctuates every day. But we just have so much more risk right now. What we used to have $400 an acre in just for, we've got $600 in it now, like I said, and it's a more of a high risk, high reward type of deal.
How so?
Yeah.
So, we're fighting for, say, 10% return on our investment. So you put $1,000 in the ground, you're hoping to get $1,000 or $100 out of it. But it's the same way, you get $3,000 in the ground. Now all of a sudden you've got say $500,000 loaned, and you're really trying to use that $500,000 to make 50, 100,000, but you're still risking that whole 500,000. I mean, if the bottom drops out of the market, it goes from $5 to $3. Your um, your income's cut in half, and you still got all that money sitting out there. So
Yeah.
it's
A
got.
lot. Yeah, a lot of
Go
it I
ahead.
think is just one of those things, and it's the same way for us. You know, when we go, it may be from a local market, we may get a bid on fertilizer at $1,300 a ton, and the reason for that, like last year, these local producers, say anhydrous, PK, whatever, you've got a certain price that it costs to make it in the US. But like Ukraine last year, they were the ones that were using a lot of anhydrous, but they or all their, overseas fertilizer plants got shut down. So the demand was overseas. And so they were buying it for $1,300 a ton. You could probably get it here based off of their cost, in the $600 a ton range, but all these US producers were shipping it over there because they could make so much more money. So to keep it in house, you actually had to meet that demand. Um, and it's no different from the supplier side. I mean, we're, footing the bill for $1,300 to make $100 as a pair, kind of the same similar story. You just got a lot more risk, with a lot less margin involved. So it's been crazy. And then you take that, the grain markets have been coming down, the past few months, and you've got all that stuff, invested, at a pretty high cost. So you catch that on the downturn, and that's when it gets really risky. So a lot of it, I mean, in Brandon's case, is going to be basically hedging his bets, in the markets, talking to his, producer or the end user, basically to get the price that he needs to cover himself, basically just to survive.
Now,
Right.
for the corn market itself, have you seen any type of subsidy from the government? I know it seems like certain farms years ago, because of the big ethanol push, they were paying, certain farms to just grow corn or whatever, as opposed to some of the other crops. Have you guys seen that in the recent years, or?
So as far as the subsidies goes, over the last couple of years, the direct payments as far as subsidies to from the government to the farmer have dropped off, but they're always subsidizing ethanol, which luckily, like we were talking about earlier, MGP, they make tons and tons and tons of ethanol. That's the vast majority of what they're doing is actually on the ethanol side for fuel.
Right.
But to be
And
honest,
that
I'm
takes
not as.
away and that takes away from feed too, right? I mean, from what I've heard, and I don't know anything about farming, but especially when the corn starts being used for that as opposed to feed, it drives up the feed costs, and then it goes back to your cattle thing where it's like, okay, now it's costing more to feed the animals. We only do it at a certain tonnage or a certain poundage, and then kick the can down the road for somebody else to feed them.
It does, and that's a double-edged sword as well. Because I mean, the government keeps subsidizing for reasons to keep using this corn. Because I mean, we're at this point, I believe we're substantially overproducing corn. So the government really is trying to help as far as doing the ethanol type things, just to keep the grain moving out of the farms and really prop up the farmers. So I mean, they are doing a lot to help us.
So, Brandon, you said that it went from in 2020, it was like $400 an acre average to now it's, six, $700 an acre average. What was it prior to 2020, if you can remember?
It fluctuated quite a bit, but it was, I would say that 300 to 400 range is pretty well where it bounced around, and that's not figuring in land prices. Um, there's a lot of different avenues to do that, but as far as what your actual inputs for fertilizer, seed, chemical, machinery, we were somewhere between 350 and $400, I would say, for the previous few years. Everything's growing exponentially, uh, as far as cost wise goes over the last 2 decades. I mean, really, since the 80s, it just keeps, it's a skyrocket straight up.
Yeah. So you bring up the machinery. What does what does an average combine cost?
if you want to go buy a combine new off the lot, no matter what size, the smallest to the biggest, you're going to spend north of $500,000 starting out.
Good Lord.
I would say the average
Holy
size
moly.
combines, brand new off the lots, somewhere in the $600,000 figure, and you can get them up. The biggest ones they make that I'm aware of are right around $1 million. That's just the combine. Then you got to buy headers for them too, and new price on a header for a farm our size, they're probably about $100,000 a piece. You got to buy two of them, one for corn,
Holy
one for
moly.
soybeans. Oh, it's
And you
outrageous. I mean, the amount of money we get invested, we're high risk, high reward. It's wild the amount of money you get just sitting in the ground for 6 months.
Holy moly. And so you've got and I obviously I've seen your stuff. You've got, that big John Deere combine, and then you just bought, well, I say just bought, you picked up a sprayer, right?
Yep. We'd run an older sprayer for quite a few years, and it was getting to be time to upgrade, but I couldn't justify, dropping a few $100,000 on a sprayer without picking up something to offset that expense. So in order to do that, I went ahead and started spraying a lot of custom acres. I spray 10 to 15,000 acres a year with that sprayer just to help me pay for it, so that it's not all coming straight out of the farm, because that's just something I personally can't justify without the extra income from it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for
essentially
sure.
a second full-time job,
Yeah.
a couple months out of the year.
No, dude. One thing, you guys definitely stay busy. So you've also incorporated the drones into your spraying. Is that more cost efficient? I know we kind of talked about it. Is that more cost efficient? Is it faster? Break that down for us.
So the drones typically around here are used for a fungicide application. So you're essentially trying to control fungus and disease in your corn and soybean crops. And how that's always been done in the past, you've got essentially three options. You're going to have an airplane spray it, you're going to have a helicopter spray it, or you're going to run a ground rig and run over a whole bunch of your crop. And of course, not every farmer has his pilot's license to be able to go out and spray. And the drone technology is kind of the first way that a farmer's been able to actually control end to end on how his fungicide's applied. Jarrett could probably talk more on that. He's pretty well versed on the fungicide side of things. It's kind of what he does for a living, part of it.
Yeah, so like, I guess when I moved up here, I started working for Heinen Brothers Agri-Service, which they're basically in the aerial application business. So they were the ones that did all the applications with the planes, the helicopters, stuff like that. Which, I mean, you've got to, those are a couple avenues, and they do really great. But you start breaking down the cost per acre. I mean, you're looking at probably $10 an acre. Maybe less on an average year, but this year it was 10. So you're going over 1,500 acres. That's a pretty significant investment. So a drone. I mean, Brandon, what do you think a drone would run? Maybe 25,000 these days, or?
Yeah, that's pretty close to. They're usually 25 to 30,000 a piece.
Yeah, so it's a pretty major cost savings to the grower if they have the time and the manpower to do that. But the airplanes really can cover some ground, and the drones are getting there. I mean, I've seen more and more acres go to a drone, this past year than I have in years past. But any way that you're getting that on, it is a good, efficient way. I think a lot of guys around here, I think Brandon included, probably just runs his ground rig on his beans, just, for the simple fact he's got that investment in the machinery and needs to pay it off. But like corn, you cannot go over it with a ground rig. I mean, there's a few guys that do, but you're knocking over a lot of your crop. So, you've got the three options: the helicopter, the plane, or that drone, and it's just a significant savings to the grower.
Yeah. So on the fungicide piece, I know, Jared, we kind of talked about it when I was out there. so I had a couple questions from folks. I told a couple of folks, I was like, hey, we're gonna have a couple guys on and talk about farming and stuff. And so the GMO versus non-GMO question kind of came up, and then what's okay to be sprayed on crops, what's not okay to be sprayed on crops. If you what is the what's the harvest on let's say an acre that has been sprayed with fungicide versus how much can you expect to harvest on an acre that has not been sprayed with fungicide? How much would you potentially lose to to some type of fungus or
Yeah.
disease?
So, I mean, that depends a lot. Um,
Sure.
you've got, premium fungicides. It's just like anything else. You could either go, get an Adidas jacket, or you can go get, something from Walmart type of thing. But um, I guess that's the best way to put it, But, all those are not created equal. But, I'm an agronomist by trade. So basically, I guess I'm a plant doctor. So the goal, to produce the biggest yield is to keep that plant as healthy as possible for as long as possible until it's matured. Um, so, even this year, and Brandon's got good experience with this too. I mean, we've got diseases that can come rob. I mean, if you're trying to grow a 250 bushel corn crop, it may come in and rob 60 bushel right off the top, and that's a significant cut into your investment. So, it may cost $30 an acre, to go spray a fungicide on there. And if you're talking $5 corn, that's 6 bushel to pay that off. So if you're going to spend 6 bushel to make 54, that's a pretty good investment. But on an average year, that just really helps mitigate stress in that plant. There's a couple different chemistries in there that are really just um, they increase the GABA levels in that crop, and it's really just to mitigate stress. So that could be heat, um, like a drought type stress. There's just a lot of different variables in there, but I mean that's the end goal is to keep that plant healthy until it gets through that grain fill period, so that you have the most yield.
So, Jared, so on your side of the house, when you end up selling your stuff to Brandon, how are those? Do you pretty much set the price and it is what it is, or is there a negotiating piece back and forth, or how does that work from your end?
I mean, there's always a
I know
negotiating piece.
we're airing dirty laundry here, so
Yeah.
hey, Brandon, you're about to find out you're going to get screwed, so just bear with it.
No. Luckily, Brandon don't beat me up too bad. But there's always different pricing. So like on our side of things, we have early order discounts basically to get us the best price. And I never go out to a grower looking to take advantage of them by any means, because they're the lifeblood of basically our business. But we kind of same thing. We might try to get 10% margin out of there. But I mean, even on like fertilizer, you're bidding up against the market. So say, I bought it $500 a ton on anhydrous. Our competition may have bought $530 a ton and contracted that price. So that gives me an opportunity to probably make a little bit more margin, as opposed to if I was at the 530 and he was at the 500, he'd set his price off 500 and I'd potentially be making less money. I mean, that's just kind of the fertilizer game. It's probably really no different than, selling gas at the gas station. You've got two gas stations right next to each other. They're going to set their price pretty darn close. But there's always, bargaining power. I mean, you're in control of what you make. But like I said, I'm never out to take advantage of anybody by any stretch of imagination. But
No,
I mean,
but it is a for-profit business, and that's what one thing
absolutely.
you try to relate to our listeners out there, and I'm going somewhere with this eventually. But it is a for-profit business where it's like, hey, it's not just the cost of the product, but you also have a company to sustain employees, your salaries, such as so forth. So,
Absolutely.
Brandon, how much say do you have? So let's like MGP. Do they because it is a commodity, so in theory they can get grain from any other farm that grows it. How much wiggle room do you have as far as what you sell, your price point to like an MGP or something like that?
So basically, how the grain market works is they put out a bid, say say the market's $5, then they have their basis on top of that. So the basis is essentially what they're paying you to get it to them. It's kind of an incentive to make it to them. A lot of times basis runs under, so say the market's at $5, they're going to go ahead and give you $4.80. Well, the market fluctuates every day. I mean, anywhere from a penny to 50 cents. Most of the time it's in that 1 to 2 to 3 cents. So basically how my marketing works is you've got to kind of pick your spots where you're making money at and sell them. Forget that you sold it, because a lot of times you go ahead and sell a big chunk. The next day she skyrockets and goes the other way. And you just got to kind of look at it and say, well, I made my money, I made my decision, and get out of it from there.
And for our listeners out there, this is where the PPI comes in. So we always talk about inflation, right? And then you always have, your CPI, Consumer Price Index, PPI, and what a lot of people don't realize, because the numbers aren't publicized as much. But hearing Jarrett and Brandon talk, you're really talking about PPI numbers. This is where inflation starts, right? So you take Brandon, who hasn't planted one seed yet, obviously has to get a lot of stuff from Jarrett. Then he's got to go out and buy the seed. And we're not even talking about the capital that you already have to have. And you just talk about a combine that's, at least $500,000, right? That's, I'm assuming that's not one of those things you buy after the, after the harvest. I mean, it's kind of like you have to have that going into it. So, these are all the inputs that lead to that price that you see at the grocery store, because at the same time, you're just seeing, the backside pricing here. Well, MGP, for example, which I'm still like, Josh, you never told me that. That's like incredible that he sells. I'm still stuck on this, but MGP hasn't even made their product yet. Right. So now there's an entire another industry, employees, company, product that goes through, and now especially with bourbons, at least 2 years up to 8, 9, 10, 11 years that they've got to turn around and sell. So all of those costs get factored in. So when people sit here and look, I mean, I always say it's like, wait till people start figuring out that inflation is year over year, because everybody's touting 3%. No. It's 3% from what it was over last year's increase. So now you're at 16 or 17 or 18%, depending on the month that you're talking about. But for our listeners out there, this is really where it all starts, because, and maybe you guys can talk a little bit more about this as far as what you see in the grocery stores compared to your price, increases, what you've seen on your end. But, this is it's kind of a domino effect that you may not see for months down the road, right? You plant your corn, you plant your, your soy or what have you. Those costs get baked in. Well, we may not see it in the stores for 4, 5, 6, 7 months. So from what you've seen, I almost sound like a farmer. I almost sound like I know what I'm talking about, but which I have no experience at all, zero. From what you guys see, and we'll start with you, Jarrett, as far as your price inputs, do you see prices going up or down over the next 6 months, a year, as far as produce and just general agriculture?
Yeah, really now our inputs are going down. Really for the first time, since that COVID era. I mean, you talk about like chemical prices, during that time frame, we had maybe, some chemicals that were, like glyphosate would have been in that $15 a gallon range, which you're using a quart to the acre. So, you've got a pretty minimal cost there. We get into, 2022, 2021, that price jumped up to, $80 a gallon. That's a pretty significant cost increase just because of, demand. And I think the reason for that, there's yellow phosphate basically, which is in glyphosate, is produced in China. Well, we couldn't get it here. So, obviously we couldn't get the demand that we needed of that product. So it just skyrockets. So basically that is reflected in a grain price kind of too, because, you've got to incentivize a grower to produce to a level. Well, if they can't produce it at the cost given, the price goes back up. So, in a commodity market, just simple supply and demand. So we saw those prices increase. Now that the grain market's kind of falling, those chemical prices have come back down, to where it's kind of almost stable. I mean, next year, we were talking about what chemical prices were going to be Friday in our meeting. And, you're looking at glyphosate back down in that $9 a gallon, maybe the cheapest it's ever been before. So I mean, inputs are coming down, but so are grain prices. So at the end of the day, we kind of just have to be happy with what we got there. On the fertilizer side, prices tend to go up based off of like a seasonal demand. So spring is going to be kind of an increased demand for your nitrogen fertilizers. So anhydrous, 32%, stuff like that. But a lot of those are based off of like a quarterly market. So Brandon probably went to his supplier and said, "Hey, I need anhydrous ammonia delivered for Q4, which would be October through December, to put anhydrous on in the fall." He's going to get his best price by prepaying that. Once we go through our prepay, it's up again. So, you're looking at probably $100 a ton increase just from prepay, which would have been probably, a month ago to where we are now. I mean, we've taken a price increase. So it just kind of depends on the seasonal trends. Kind of like the grain markets, it's always going to be the cheapest at harvest normally. And then as you get grain moved through the system, you're going to have a higher demand or incentivize that MGP to pay more for that product just so they can have it.
Now, some of those, when you talk about the price, I know we kind of chatted about it. Some a lot of farmers they do a contract with the grain elevator, and that's the price is the price, and that's what their contract is for whatever by you got to have this many tons or whatever in by this month, and then what is it what is it called again when you just hey man you just wait for that day, you shove it in your grain bin and you just wait for the day that the market's high, and then you throw it in the truck and you go. I couldn't remember what the term was for that, Brandon, that you called that.
So that's called spot selling, is essentially what it is. I mean,
Okay,
like
yeah.
you said, it's just the day you decide you want to go ahead and take grain out of your bin and haul it to town. You're going to drive it across the scales. They're going to give you whatever market value is for it, and you're going to keep going. But most guys, for the most part, at least most of the guys that I know, contract everything. So I mean, I'm contracting out 6 months in advance already, just to try to start locking in profits as we see what they should be. But the biggest thing is you can't over contract, because there's a decent chance that you can over contract, you can underproduce what you're contracting as well. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
so one of the interesting things that I was thinking of when we were talking about the inputs is a lot of the times I'm paying my inputs 15 months before I'm even going to start getting that cash back. So like Jarrett was talking with prepay, I'm already prepaying for fertilizer for next year, and I won't even get to sell that grain until December to June of 2025. So I mean,
Holy
we're
moly.
15, 18 months out with money tied up at this point, and what's really starting to hit us is these interest rates.
Oh yeah.
I operated for a long time on 3, 4, 5% interest, and now we're getting up in the 8%, and it's, to me, it doesn't seem like it's slowing down, and it's going to start turning into a real problem very fast.
Now, what would you have to do? What are if the interest rates keep going up? What are some of the is that going to get passed on to the consumer, or is that one of those to where heaven forbid farms start taking a look at, okay, is it worth being in the farming business anymore?
Um, Guys are really going to try to keep their head above water as long as they can, but man, when the banks stop getting their money, they're gonna start looking for it other ways. Of course, everybody's got to put up collateral in some way, shape, or form, and the banks can't collect their money. That's when stuff starts getting sold, and that starts a snowball effect that lasts for generations. I mean, it'll put families out.
Yeah, I think we saw a lot of that with farms in the 90s. In the early 2000s, people had to start. People had basically like they say, like saying goes, man, they had to sell the farm, you know, to keep their head above water. Well, I'd say the '90s. I'd say more the '80s than anything. So, Jared, you mentioned China. One of the things I know, you know, reading up and doing some due diligence, China buys an incredible amount of soybeans from us. Um, Approximately how much do you guys, you know, I didn't see the percentage on how much they buy, but how much do you guys know, if any, what they buy, and then how do they manipulate the market? I think we kind of talked how they would, you know, promise to buy stuff, and you know, you go out and you grow it, and then they turn around and they say, yeah, we're not going to buy that, which, you know, kind of tanks the market. uh, one of y'all, you know, just kind of talk us through that and how that works.
Yeah, I'd say Brandon might know a little bit more than me because I'm probably not as consistent on the grain markets as he is. But you know, with China canceling contracts, I mean that's just your demand, you know, that goes away for that product. And I think they're the biggest customer, and you know, end user for us on a lot of different commodities. You know, milo, soybeans. I mean, they're even a big corn buyer. You know, so they're really one of our biggest end users, and you know, you take that demand away, and that's where you see that grain price drop.
Yeah, I was trying to look that up today, and I couldn't. I know that there's a straight answer on how much we actually export to China. It's somewhere in the realm of, I don't. It's multiple million bushels. Uh, just trying to Google it real fast, but I'm not quite fast enough. But I was also looking to get a straight answer on how China is allowed to cancel the contracts. So there's a lot of times China will come in and say, you know, we're going to buy, say, 10 million bushel over the next 6 months. And, you know, they'll lock in the price. Then the grain elevators start putting out their bids, up in their bids. We start selling it to them. And, you know, 3 months down the road, turns out Brazil has cheaper corn than the U.S. China just comes along and says, null and void. We're buying everything from Brazil. And that's what'll tank the crop market more than anything. So when China starts canceling, and I did a lot of Googling and I just couldn't come across exactly why they're allowed to do it, besides the fact that they're just a huge importer and China kind of does what they want.
Yeah, you think that there would be something that they, you know, once they agreed to that, it would be, you know, they would be locked in. I know they've done the same thing with pecans in the South. You know, around where my parents live, there's, you know, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of acres of pecan farms, and you know, China's probably one of the main buyers of pecans from the United States because for some reason they don't they haven't figured out how to plant their own and grow their own. And they've kind of done the same thing, you know, down there, but the demand doesn't seem to go away for pecans there because pecans now are incredibly expensive. I remember as a kid, like you could go buy a pound of pecans from the store for a couple bucks, and now, I mean, you know, half a pound of chopped pecans in the grocery store is $12. Um, you know, so they, you know, they definitely know the same thing, and they're definitely manipulating the market. I think some of it, you know, the supply and demand. I would gather, and it's completely anecdotal. I don't have any empirical evidence, you know, to back it up. But I think part of it too is, you know, them just wanting to manipulate our own markets, and you know, cause stress in our system.
Well, and it's also, you know, farmers have short-term memories, right? I mean, you're saying you look at the amount of risk that you have every year, and it's like, hey, they, you know, it's kind of like that beaten dog syndrome. Yeah, you beat me last year. Hey, this time, hey, you know what? I know we screwed you last year, but you know what? This year, I really need this amount of crop. And you're like, hey, new year, and you know, new seller, and this and that. So I'm sure a lot of that is to play as well, where they can cancel the contract. That's great. That year is over. Now they want to come back to you. And so it's like, hey, you know, you've got to make sales every year to make it, right? And you know, they obviously take advantage of that. And I know on the back end, I've seen some stuff in the organic market. I've got a buddy who lives out in California, and he basically handles all the pesticides and stuff like that for the organic, you know, agricultural market. And I've sat there and listened to the guy on phone calls with, you know, people overseas. You know, he was in particular, I think it was like plums or something like that, or blueberries, whatever the hell it was. But you know, talking to a buyer down or a distributor down in Brazil or whatever in the hell it was. And, basically, you guys talking about the market going up and down so much, saying, hey, look, we need to stop the flood of whatever fruit it was into the US. So put a freeze on it. He's like, put a freeze on it for 2 months because otherwise, and which we've seen in Ukraine, right? That's when we're talking about Poland and a couple other places that have banned, agriculture coming out from Ukraine because they're so worried that foreign companies are going to come in and flood the market. And then, like you said, Brandon, you paid for this stuff 2 years ago, so you expect some type of profit coming out of this, and then we get flooded with cheap crap, and then it drives everything down. I think the other thing you got to look at, China's one aspect of it, and I'll kick it out to either one of you guys or even Josh. One of the big concerns that we have here in Arizona are the Saudis. So the Saudis are actually coming over here, buying farmland, using our water, growing their own agriculture, and then shipping it back. So here's what's mind-boggling to me, and I guess I'll throw it to Brandon to see, do you guys see that happening out there? It is cheaper for a foreign company to come to Arizona, buy 100 acres, grow their own lettuce, use our water, and ship it back than it is for them to grow it over there. That to me is mind-boggling. Have you guys seen any type of foreign investment or foreign farms or anything like that out in your neck of the woods?
Honestly, we haven't. As far as I know, I haven't seen any of it in this area. A big contributing factor that might be our land prices here are higher than most of the other places in this country. Seems like where these outside sources are buying land's going for $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 an acre. Around here, it's 10, 12, 15 an acre. So I really think that's kind of what's keeping them out of this area. So to be honest, I'm not that knowledgeable on it just because I haven't had to deal with the outside investors either from different states or even different countries.
What about you, Jared? You seen any of that?
Man, I've heard of a little bit. My family farms out in southwest Kansas. Where we're a little bit different as far as price per acre for farm ground. I mean, it's rising for sure. We've got a lot of like wind infrastructure going out there, which is jacking the price of farm ground up just because you have that return on investment, with the windmills. But I've heard of maybe some, Chinese investor groups, out in those big parcels of pasture and stuff. But I can't confirm that. I mean, I would be definitely willing to bet you if they were going to get it somewhere in Kansas, that's probably where they'd go, is that western part of the state, just because there is a lot of that wind energy, and they're talking about solar panels and stuff like that. So who knows? But I would be willing to bet you that's probably where, if they were going to go anywhere, that's where they'd be. Because I mean, Brandon and I were at a land auction the other day, and I mean, it's just stupid what people are paying for land up here. I mean, that's a significant investment in, producing a crop, and you've almost got to have other land paying for it to pay it off, and you may not even pay it off in your lifetime. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So you guys live where you guys are at. It's obviously pretty good ground. One of the reasons for the price and everything. So when I was out there in July, we talked about migrant workers and kind of what that scene was. I know where my parents live down in southern Georgia. Again, there's a lot of farms. The vast majority aren't anywhere near the size of the farms in the Midwest. But a number of the big farms, big operations down there. Obviously, a lot of the migrant workers are all Hispanics. That's just the nature of the business. But you guys have mentioned that there was a number of non-Hispanic, specifically South Africans, kind of moving into the area to work the farms. If you could just let the listeners know, like, what's going on with that, kind of how do you guys think that started, and what you're seeing out there, and why you think that is.
Yeah. Brandon would have some influence on this one too, just because there's some stuff locally. But before Bree and I got married and I moved up here, I worked for a co-op, which would be kind of the same, just supply type of stuff that I'm doing now. in Abilene, Kansas, and we had 3 South African workers. Um, and it's not like we're paying them a lot. I mean, above minimum wage, but they may be making $15 an hour here, um, and they're absolutely thrilled with it. I mean, you got to give them a place to live and kind of give them a stipend, but I mean, man, there was times I'd go home at 6, 7 o'clock, and they'd be sitting there begging for me for something to do because they're away from their families, and I mean they're hard workers, and I think we just lose a lot of people to like Kansas City. I mean, you can't get anybody for a decent wage, here, because they'll go to Kansas City, get a higher wage, and come back. Um, so we've seen a little bit of that transition over to those um, workers from South Africa because they're getting run out of South Africa like it's going out of style too. I mean, the South African people don't even want them there, so I mean, they're getting threatened to be killed and stuff like that. I mean, it's borderline genocide. So,
and it can be tough to get them here to work too. I've just looked into the process a little bit, but the way I understand it is you have to prove that you've been looking to get help around local from U.S. citizens, and that you can't do it. And that's our biggest issue is just finding people to work. Doesn't I don't there's a multitude of issues. One, we can't necessarily afford to pay somebody $100,000 a year to come be a farmhand. It's also expensive to offer benefits for just a single or 2 or 3 employees. So that just makes it hard on us. And then, so the South Africans is a good option. There's companies that essentially bring them in, do all the visa work and everything, and you pay the company provides them insurance, then the company pays them. You just have to give them a place to live and guarantee them 40 hours a week to work, and anything after that's on you.
And I think it's the H2A program is what it's called. I'm pretty sure. Isn't that right, Brandon?
Yeah, I think you're right.
H2A.
Yeah.
So on that, I think a lot of people across the country have been having a problem finding people to work, just finding people to show up to work. I mean, ever since COVID, there's been a number of help wanted signs and this and that. What could, let's say, a U.S. A U.S. citizen, that's cousin Eddie holding out for a management position. They come out to a farmhand job in the Midwest. What could they reasonably expect to make?
I would say a decent average salary would be somewhere in the 40 to $50,000 range. Of course, it obviously depends on experience and everything else, and how big of an operation they're going out to work for. And,
sure.
But yeah, somewhere in that 40 to 50s, I would say average.
Yeah. So let's say somebody who was, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say somebody who's 18 years old, just graduated high school, is like, I don't want to go to college right now. I want to wait a couple of years. They show up and, they're able-bodied, and they're ready to grind. They could kind of start off making 40, 50.
Maybe not start off. That's probably more on the upper end of things. The guys that are experienced and been there a couple of years. I mean, I know $17.50 an hour straight out of high school isn't out of the realm of possibilities. I mean, opportunity to make upwards 20, 25, starting to work up into that higher pay bracket. It seems like what happens a lot with, if you find a good employee, you train them up, you get them going, everything's going great. And then now that they've learned, they go ahead and head somewhere else for higher pay. And then you're back to square one to find somebody else that's decent that can run your stuff and be careful, because you're putting a 18-year-old kid in a $500,000 machine. they can tear stuff up pretty quick. It's
Hell
pretty tough to
yeah.
find somebody who's not going to do that.
He's done had a couple drinks.
Yeah, Brandon, you remember when you were 18 and you were the one crashing stuff?
I I have crashed many a farm equipment. I still do.
So when it comes to labor, and don't incriminate yourselves, obviously, and I know you both of you are fine, upstanding American citizens that would never break the law. Do any of you, and maybe it's more for Jarrett because I'm a, you're exposed to not just one farm, but even with you, Brandon, do you see a lot of your other farmers, other helpers, other companies out there using a lot of illegal labor at all? I know you're a little bit removed from the border. We see it a lot down here in Arizona for obvious reasons, but do you run across that at all out there?
Man, I mean, we've got to get through a whole hiring process and everything like that. I mean, we're fairly corporate. Um, so no, I mean, we don't really see a lot of that. That if that was going to happen, it would be more on the farm side. But
Yeah, and I don't see it here at all. I couldn't think of one person who has an illegal hired. Um, it seems like that happens to me. Just thinking about it more on the real heavy intensive labor type jobs. Um, I'm trying to think what would be a good example.
like concrete,
like produce that needs manual labor to actually harvest it.
E-
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, they're gonna have to walk through the field with a corn knife and knock stuff down. Where here, you got to be able to run equipment. Nobody's out there anymore hand picking corn and running it
Yeah.
through the sheller.
that brings up kind of an interesting thing. My family's in Southwest Kansas, so that's Dodge City area. You've got a higher Hispanic concentration of people, and I would bet you that there's probably a few running around out there. Guy looking for truck driver or something, just needs somebody to get it to the elevator. I guess I wouldn't really put it past somebody out there to potentially have somebody like that because you get a lot of that migration towards Dodge City. I think it's really kind of majority Hispanic anymore. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would guess that would be, probably the area that would go.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, especially with the flooding that we've had at the border. I mean, obviously these folks have to have jobs somewhere, and you brought up a valid point. I think both of you were, yeah, you're not putting that dude, in your combine to drive that thing around, but you got a lot of the manual labor, type jobs, and maybe out here. I mean, we've got lettuce farms as far as the eye can see, and you see those folks sitting out there, and I feel bad for them. I mean, God bless them for working, but I see them out there, man. It's like 110, 115 degrees, and they're out there with their baskets dumping stuff in there, and I'm just like, dude, that is a crazy way to live. So I just wasn't sure how far out from Arizona, because here, I mean, you want to go get your concrete poured or whatever, you just run down to your local Home Depot, Circle K, and they'll do whatever. So I know with like our farms out here, especially with the town that I live at, you've got a lot of folks that are manning that, but wasn't sure how far outside of Arizona that's proliferated or what have you. So, quick question on the grain thing because I'm still stuck on the MGP piece. So, I'm pissed that Josh didn't mention this to me. It's incredible to me, and we do need to shout them out so we can get something here. So, with your grain that goes to MGP, is it a certain quality that you have to send? Like, what's their requirements for what you send to them?
So it's actually kind of backwards of what you'd think. You'd think MGP being what they are, they only take the highest quality of grain. But really, for what they're doing for the distilling the ethanol and whatnot, they kind of they don't get the bottom of the barrel. Like, I mean, they'll still reject you if you've got severe issues with your corn, but there's a lot more strict guidelines at other elevators in the area. And there's one where if they see a soybean on the rail of your grain truck, you're out. You don't get to dump that load.
Wow.
Where that happens to you, you just take her over to MGP and they kind of mix and match, and that's what you get to drink later on. Put in your car.
Yeah,
you get some soybean. So you said you have severe issues with your corn. What are some of the issues that you'll get kickback for?
This is probably more Jarrett's expertise type of area as far as there's like alpha toxins or
Yeah.
Jarrett, you can lead the way.
Yeah. So that's going to be an issue really more than anything in a drought year. Um, as you see the corn plant mature, it actually, the ear kind of tips over. So it's facing down, and that husk actually basically rolls the water out of there. But in a drought year, you don't have a heavy ear, so it sits there like this. And all that water comes in the top of that husk, and that's what creates, those aflatoxins and stuff like that. Um, it'd be a different type of a toxin in wheat, but similar to that too. So you can get rejected for stuff like that. Sometimes, on the grain storage side of things, you can have grain that gets hot. Um, and that would be more of a Brandon thing. Grain gets hot, gets all moldy and black. They probably reject you for that too. Um, but Brandon, you might touch on, like, so you've got MGP, and then you've got Bartlett. But what about like Lifeline, that actually would be like food grade corn? That's another
Yeah.
local.
So Lifeline's more of a
Go ahead.
yeah. Lifeline's more of a food grade type of deal. Their standards are high. They're testing every load, and it slows the process down, but essentially they'll probe you, so they'll essentially pull a core of corn out of your trailer, run it through a tester, and you're going to sit there and wait for about 15 minutes while they do every single different test on that corn to make sure it's going to be food grade for human consumption. The other ones don't necessarily don't go that in depth, at least at the elevator. I'm sure down the road they do.
Yeah. So when I was at the co-op, actually, I did not get involved in the grain side much, but we've got, so you've got your agronomy division, and then you've got your grain side of things. So we basically send, wheat would come into our terminal. We'd load it on a train, and it would head to Mexico, and it had to be a certain standard when it got there. Otherwise, the train would get rejected. So you've got to do all that testing ahead of time, whether it be protein, moisture, stuff like that, and they hit that perfectly. So they're blending grain, from as it comes in. They're sorting moisture, they're sorting protein, stuff like that, so that they hit the quality that basically the consumer needs, so that it doesn't get rejected. And they do all that testing in house as it goes out the door. So, that was just one little thing that I really got involved in. But man, I was not in that side much. But there are certain standards that you have to go through, when you get that grain. So if you've got a junk load, it's more than likely going to get mixed in with some really, really good stuff at a very low rate, to meet that standard. So they're constantly mixing grain to get to a certain quality that they need.
Oh, gotcha. So, Brandon, on the food quality, so it takes you, you're going to sit there, for 15 minutes while they, run the traps on all that. Do they pay more than, if you were to go dump it at a non-food grain quality place like MGP or anything?
They're really pretty similar for the most part. They stuff like that, they'll typically offer a little bit higher premium. So if you come in with corn that's got a higher protein or a higher test weight, or that's also where you can sell non-GMO corn, then they'll start to give you, they'll have their base price, say $5, and then they'll throw another 12 cents on top for higher test weight, or another 15 on top for like a non-GMO type of deal. So that's kind of how they end up paying on the higher side. But for the most part, they're pretty similar, really, compared to all the other grain elevators in town, which is surprising to me.
I gotcha. So I know you've shown me before, but for the listeners, how can you go while your corn is growing? Let's say in the summer, you're out there, you grab an ear, and how can you tell? How can you estimate rather, how much corn that area, that acre or whatever is gonna produce? How many bushels?
So it's just pretty simple math for the most part. You're figuring the first number that you have to know is how many plants per acre you were planted at. So in this area, we're typically planting about 32,000 seeds per acre. And out of that, you're expecting to get, say, 32,000 final stand is what you call that. From there, you can go out, you can grab an ear of corn, you count the rows by the width around. So an average year would be, say, 16 kernels around by 34 tall. You multiply that, and then you have your dividing factor, which is typically how many kernels are in a bushel. A good average number for an average year is about 80,000. So if you're taking, so you take your 32 rows tall times 16, that's your final kernel count of 512 kernels. Your standing population should be about 32,000. That's 16 million and some change kernels per acre divided by your average average kernels per bushel, which would be 80,000. So that'd come out to 204 bushels in acres. Kind of how you have to estimate it. You just kind of take a field representative field sample is what you're looking for.
I would be the worst farmer ever because I'm Florida public school math. I would never get that. I'd be like, I don't know how much is here. Like,
Man, I can
dumb.
even do that math. So if I can do it, you can do it.
I don't know, man. I don't think you want to take that Pepsi challenge.
Yeah.
I'm bad at math. It's like our kids when when they pass the 6th grade. I was like, hey man, I'm done helping you with math homework. You gotta go to mom.
Yeah.
I can't help you anymore.
Yeah. And I think, even when you're talking about estimating yield, a lot of that can change, right even now, because you get into that test weight side of things, that kernel count may go from, potentially even up to 70,000 is what you would divide that by, which would be more yield. But, you get a disease come in late and you lose test weight and you may take that number down to 90,000. Well, then all of a sudden you might be around 170. So
to explain the test weight, essentially what the test weight is there's a nominal factor for what they call a bushel, even though a bushel is a volumetric measurement. They just streamlined it so a bushel of corn is 56 pounds to make it nice and simple. They don't take the dimensions of your trailer to get that figured out. What the test weight is how many bushels it actually takes, or how many pounds it actually takes to make a bushel, or how many pounds it actually be in a true bushel. So you're trying to get over that 56 is where you're going to start really making your money at, because you've got more weight and less grain. Just you can take more to town, and it ends up being more money in your pocket at the end of the day. So you're talking from 56 to 62. That's a 10% increase on your yield right there.
So I got a question for Jarrett regarding like GMO versus non-GMO and similarly pesticides. So being a family man, do any of those concern you? Do you lean one way as opposed to another? And as far as the pesticides that are being used, and understanding there's a business side to it, obviously, but is there anything out there like, I'm not so keen on putting, eating foods necessarily that were treated with this or that or what have you?
No, I mean, I have zero concerns, on that side of things. What it comes down to at the end of the day is like, when we're growing a GMO, basically it's just a trait inserted into that corn that's not going to affect us in any way, shape, or form. It's just a factor of, hey, can this product metabolize, glyphosate? So like you plant, Roundup Ready corn, that corn plant, basically, whenever you spray a chemical on it, it's got to decide, is this poison? Is this going to kill me? Or am I going to send it right on through? And that's the way it is with glyphosate. It's a non-selective herbicide, so it kills grasses, broadleaves, stuff like that. So inserting that trait helps us, kill those weeds that are out there. And then, it's completely passed through that plant. by the time it gets to grain. And I mean, the FDA would regulate, that stuff, um, to the point where if there was a quality issue, it would for sure be out. But I think, I was doing some research on that, and there's like fractions of a parts per million of glyphosate that could potentially end up in a kernel of corn. So from my eyes, I'm not worried about it at all. I mean, zero.
And how about you, Brandon?
And I
Anything
would,
that you see that concerns you? And not to put any of you guys on the spot, but we have a lot of listeners, and I've always been a fan of like I got one of our other listeners. He does a lot of the organic, non-GMO, and this and that. And there's a difference between having boys and girls. Like my boy, I want him on steroid milk because I don't need him to be like 5'2" and weigh 110 pounds when everybody else is all yoked out Ronnie Coleman style, right? So I think there is an advantage to it, and it's kind of funny because we were talking about the Roundup Ready corn and stuff like that a couple episodes ago. But not to put either of you in the spot, but do you see anything on your end that causes concern?
so I'll just say that I know a lot of guys in this general area that have been using Roundup for years. I mean, and has had Roundup all over their hands, getting into all their pores. I'm sure some of them have drank it at one point in time. And yeah, you don't see the increased cancer rates around here like I would expect to if it was causing all the issues that you know is people have said is out there. I'm sure it's a carcinogen in some way, shape, or form. Seems like about everything is, but I don't see it necessarily as an issue for me, or I'm not concerned about it for my family.
Yeah.
And I'll promise you, if you go out to a field that has been sprayed with glyphosate, hasn't been sprayed with glyphosate, you're gonna want to eat the corn off the one that's been sprayed because man, it's a woolly, weedy, gross mess on the ones that aren't really using a whole lot of chemical, unless they're doing it right on the organic side. And there's some guys that are, but man, there's a lot of guys that don't put the effort in required to do that the right way, and they get some gross looking fields.
Yeah.
Hey man, all you got to do with that is just chase it down with some high proof MGP, and it'll cancel each other out, and you'll be good.
Yeah.
So Roger brings up the the organic. I think there's some misconceptions out there about what is organic. What does organic truly mean? When something gets labeled organic, a lot of people think that means one thing, and I've read a couple of different things. So if you guys could break down when something is labeled organic, what does that really mean?
Brandon, you want to go for that one? Or you want me to?
I can give her my best shot, I guess.
Yeah, go for it.
So to my best understanding, organic is a non-GMO. So the corn seed has not been genetically modified in any way. It doesn't have any tolerance. And on the organic side, I don't believe they spray them with any kind of chemical at all. I don't think they can use any type of synthetic fertilizer. So a lot of their weed control and stuff is either turning the dirt over and killing the weeds that way by just essentially uprooting them, or they've got some cool weed burners, weed zappers, stuff like that. But as far as the organic goes, that's my best understanding, and maybe Jared's got a more scientific.
Yeah. So I mean, man, we deal with very few, if any, organic guys around here. I mean, very little. But I think the bigger side of things, and even probably a few years ago, I mean, Brandon, you guys grew conventional corn, which that would be zero traits, zero, so like it wouldn't be Roundup Ready, but that doesn't mean that you're not spraying anything over it. I mean, there's still, herbicides that you can use to help control pests in that crop, whether it be weeds, even bugs, stuff like that. I mean, you're still spraying stuff over the top of that. It would just be a non-GMO. So it would still be a hybrid corn variety, but just because it's non-GMO or conventional does not mean that you're not using chemical on top of it.
Okay. Yeah, and so that was I think that's where, some of the questions come into play is, because people think organic and they're like organic has never been touched with any chemical period, right? Non-GMO or anything. And I didn't think that was the case based on what I read, but I wasn't 100% sure. Again, Florida public schools. So I wanted to ask you guys on that. So when you see organic, it it means it hasn't been sprayed with a not with a GMO, but it could have been sprayed with a non-GMO chemical. That is that a correct statement?
So, so there's a difference. The biggest difference lies between non-GMO and organic. Non-GMO you can spray with any of the chemicals. It's not going to kill the corn. Organic cannot be sprayed with any chemicals at all. Um, and like a lot of times to become certified organic, you've got to run no chemicals through your farm for 3 years. It's a heck of a process to get to
Yeah,
be a certified organic farmer.
Holy
it
moly!
is. And I would,
I
man,
mean,
I would
I don't
almost
know.
argue.
I don't know how guys do.
Yeah, I would almost
Go
argue
ahead.
that you're you're doing a lot more for yourself by farming with GMOs because um, the newest trend, I guess, in ag is um, soil health, regenerative ag, stuff like that. So using cover crops. I mean, there's a lot of soil biology that goes on, in your soil that converts, say calcium phosphate into P2O5, which would be a plant available form of phosphorus that it would use. You go out there with some organic stuff and you've got to go cultivate it, you're killing your soil biology that is helping you out. So man, an organic corn farmer, he may raise 70 bushel corn. Brandon's out here raising 200 plus because you have the technology incorporated into that plant. um, and you're really helping yourself out by using some of those products, to pass on to the consumer. I mean, we're trying to feed a growing world. I mean, you cannot do that without. I mean, if everybody wants to go starve, I mean, we'll go organic if you want, but
Well, and organic doesn't mean healthier. One of the some of the conversations I've had, and going back to what you're talking about with GMO versus non-GMO, and then what you spray on it. So essentially with organic, you can't spray anything that's been synthesized, nothing synthetic. But one of the things that we had talked about probably about 100 episodes ago was a lot of organic farmers, and anecdotal and the limited conversations I've had, they use a lot of copper, right? They use a lot of copper because it's natural. And so there are some ties, and I don't want to sound like RFK. Yeah, we're probably gonna get banned on YouTube because we just mentioned his name. But there's some concern that there is an association or a correlation with the amount of copper, because I've heard, again, anecdotal, that they'll drop 100 times the amount of copper on there because they can't use synthetic pesticides. They'll use 100 times or 1,000 times the amount of copper in those fields. And so there's assumed to be some link between that and migraines and headaches and God knows whatever else, right? Because at the end of the day, they're having to put something on there. So it's just a matter of, hey, do you want 1,000 pounds of copper, or do you want whatever else other pesticide that they're using for that's going to result in a higher yield. And I think that's why we see the organic stuff, it's 2, 3, 4 times the price, and for me, it's just, everybody, it just kind of, you see it in Whole Foods, you see it in the Trader Joe's, and everybody just assumes. And I would tell our listeners, hey, do your own due diligence. Maybe that's one of the things that we need to do a little bit more on an episode specifically on the organic stuff that, just kind of became synonymous with, well, hey, this is healthier for you. No, not so much. I mean, and I think from everything that you guys are saying, and then some of the stuff that I read, it's like it may actually be worse for you. You just got caught up on the buzzword that it's the healthy choice now.
It just feels better to eat organic.
yeah, exactly. Well, and there's a difference, right? Because what you guys are doing is at scale, and we have like a bunch of lemon trees and lime trees and stuff out here, and it's hard to quantify in your head that scale. Like I look at my lemon tree, it's organic. Okay, I don't spray anything. You know why? Because I eat like 4 lemons a year. I can afford to do that. But like Jarrett saying, you're trying to feed an entire world, right, or an entire country. That's like, okay, take your 4 lemons that you eat and multiply it times 10 million. Okay, now there's a big difference in that. Absolutely.
And we were at a Kansas corn meeting the other night, which would be basically be our corn advocacy group within Kansas to basically promote, the use of corn through ethanol, in fuel, feed and food. And they had some interesting statistics on like where, that food is going. Like if you eat a taco shell, you're eating probably Kansas corn. I mean, you really are. I mean, there's so much stuff that corn is in, and we don't think about it, but it's on our table every day. I mean, um, they had an interesting, deal that like Mexico is actually buying corn, making all their stuff, and sending it back. So I get that stuff from Aldi. Those corn chips, man, they're fire, and I bet you they're made in Mexico.
They're
So
good.
yeah,
They're legit.
but
We got an
yeah, I mean,
Aldi here. It's the best.
a lot of that stuff ends up on everybody's table in general. So
Can't forget about
Yeah.
the delicious high fructose corn syrup either that's in all
oh
the
yeah.
pop. Man, it's wonderful.
I can see Wilford Brimley now. I see him right now. Like diabetes.
Got my diabetes.
That's right. So on that, so talking about corn, jumping back to the some of the other questions that we got, because again, we hit up a couple folks and we're like, hey, what questions you have? And I know, my mom's one of them, because my mom's always trying to figure out what's better. Is it better organic, or it's GMOs? And she always shies away from the GMOs. She wants things that are organic. But then like Roger was saying, like you guys are saying, she complains that organic is so much more expensive, and it's like, okay, well, there's a reason for that, because they lost half the crop to the boll weevil, or whatever the hell, some type of fungus or disease, right? And so it's like you get to pick. um but one of the other questions that we got is, how, what do all the different cuts of meat mean? When it says it's USDA, when it's it's choice, what are those cuts? What, from, I guess, from like the lowest end cut of meat to the highest? Brandon, this might be more for you. I don't know, Jared, you know as well, chime in. But like, take us from the lowest cut of meat to the highest, and what each one of those mean.
So there's essentially, as far as I know, there's about 8 different classifications for beef, um, starting all the way from the bottom tier, which is the stuff that's going to go into dog food, and then from dog food you go up to hot dogs, and then you start getting up to from hot dogs you're getting into frozen meals and canned meals and stuff like that. When you're getting up into the stuff that I imagine you're talking about, the stuff that you're going to see on the shelf,
Yeah.
um, there's 3 different classifications for the most part of the USDA certified beef. So there's select, there's choice, and there's prime. Uh, your select's going to be your essentially the lowest grade that they're going to put on the shelf for the most part, and that's probably somewhere in the realm of 30% of all the beef that's produced is going to end up being select. The biggest difference between each of the grading is typically just in the marbling. So what your fat content is in that meat, it's gonna determine what how juicy, how tender your steak is. So select's kind of your bottom of your barrel as far as steaks and stuff go. Next up, the vast majority of the steaks, kind of the best bang for your buck, is going to be the choice, and 50 to 55% of all beef that ends up in the grocery store is going to be select. It's pretty well marbled. It's So the classification for that is essentially 4 to 10% fat. The select is 2 to 4% fat, so it's like pretty tough. Um, the next step up from choice is going to be your prime, and that is 2 to 5% of all the beef that comes in the grocery store is going to be prime. That's why you're paying more. There's a lot less of it. There's a difference. It's not quite as huge. So choice was 4 to 10% fat content. Prime is 8 to 13. So it's just pretty well higher quality across the board as far as your marbling and your fat content goes. That's really the biggest difference between any of the grading is it's all figured off of fat content.
Now, when you start talking about the prime, I would imagine, or really any of those cuts, how much are we shipping overseas that you know of?
That is a question I am not well informed enough to answer, to be honest with you.
Okay. Yeah, no,
I
it's
do
all
have one
good.
question on the grading real quick. So with the cow, can the cow have multiple grades of meat? I mean, obviously there's different cuts of steak, right? So can you have like you've got, women that have a big ass or, small chest or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Can they have nobody that we know, but can a cow have multiple like, hey, you know what, the fillet piece is, this rating and the porterhouse is whatever.
So as far as I know, they grade the whole cow as one one grade. So they take the same chunk of meat from every cow, and that's what they base their grading off of. It's one of the cuts of meat in between two of the ribs is how they do it, and
Uh,
that simplifies it so that when they sell it, they're just selling this whole cow as 600 pounds of prime meat versus 200 of prime, 400 to select.
I've
Just
been
kind of
called that
streamlines that
many times in
process.
my life.
what dog food?
Prime meat.
Prime? No one's ever called you prime.
Yeah, you got me. You got me.
Anyway, anyway, yeah. So on the beef part, so here in our household, we have gone back and forth many times, and we just kind of never fully committed. Um, but I think now, we're in the market for a deep freezer. I just got to find room in my garage to to put one. We're gonna have to do an upright. We don't have room for a chest freezer, but we kind of resigned ourselves. We're just going to go and start buying half a cow, at a time, because you go to we went to the store here a week or two ago and basically got a chuck roast, and it wasn't a big chuck roast. I mean, it's just a couple pound chuck roast. It was like $25, and it wasn't prime. I don't think it was a prime cut, but it was like $25. So I was like, okay, this is not sustainable. Um, so are people better off? And again, I know you guys have kind of gotten away from feeding them all the way up to slaughter, and you might not know the answer to this question, but kind of once that cow hits the last feedlot, right? It's getting fed. It's got its final meal. The governor's not calling. Kind of how does that kind of what's the process for that cow to wind up on a grocery shelf? In the cooler at your grocery store, and is it better? So two-part question, and is it better for people to just go buy direct from a farmer? That half a cow. Granted, a farmer who actually who slaughters cows and stuff like that. I know you guys don't, but is it better for them to go to the farmer and just buy it from them instead of getting meat at the grocery store?
So the process from the field to the packer to the guy who's putting it in the packages there at the store. They go to a feedlot, they fatten them up as best they can. They're trying to put as much fat on them as they possibly can to get them up into that into that prime category. It's what everybody's trying for. Um, Take them, you get them to the butcher, and it's a and they'll essentially go ahead and kill the cow, hang it. They'll I don't know how graphic you want to get here. Essentially, it sits on a meat hook. They go through and they start processing everything, and I don't know. From that point, I'm not sure, how each company does it differently. But
Sure.
a lot of the times, they're hanging them there for a couple of days, bleed, getting all the blood and everything else out, so you're just getting pure meat. But as far as buying local, I mean, I don't think there's a better way to do it than that. You're gonna say it's a bigger upfront cost is the biggest downside, but you're gonna save ridiculous amounts of money. You're gonna get a lot higher quality product. You're helping somebody out. You're cutting out that big middleman that's typically making the biggest chunk of change there. Um, but you find yourself a good farmer, raises beef. You can say, you want to, you can say, I want that cow. Um, and the butcher will call you, how do you want these cuts? You can tell them, I want 1.5 inch steaks. I want 3/4 steaks. I want all the roast. I want the roast turned into steaks. I want the roast turned into hamburger. You can really do pretty much exactly what you want. And you're going to cut if you would go to spend that at a grocery store to get the same amount of meat, you're probably talking 3 times the cost, I would imagine. And
Holy
you're
moly.
you're gonna pay out the door somewhere in the realm of $4 to $5 a pound. Where you go to the grocery store and you get your lowest quality cut of steak, and you're still gonna pay $9-10 a pound. You're gonna pay $7-8 a pound for ground beef. And you're saving a lot of money, and you're getting a lot better product at the end of the day. And you got a freezer full of meat, and you don't have to drive to the grocery store.
That's very true. So yeah, we're ready to pull the trigger and do it again. Like you said, did about it, and it was like like a 3 or 4 pound chuck roast. Not big at all, and it was like $25, and I was like, holy moly! Like I can't. Like this is crazy, and you're in it, right? So that was dinner one night, and that was only for one night. Right? I mean, we're a family of 5. Like we kill that in one night, and that wasn't that didn't include everything else that went into the meal. And so for like one dinner, it's like, damn man, we're in this thing for like $70. Like it's crazy just for one dinner. I got to win to Chick-fil-A for cheaper than that.
Yeah.
You know,
There's
so
actually been kind of a fluctuation. I would even just say since COVID of guys actually doing that. Like there's a local guy around here, um, you know, in that COVID area, they were needing basically producers. So he got, certified, and they actually take their farm from, they grow it, they, feed them out. They're the processor, and they're licensed to sell it in house. So, you've got the whole shebang on that farm. That helps them because they get to capture all that margin that the meat packers would, and you're getting that discount passed on to the consumer. I think that's a great way to do it, and that's the way we've done it, and I think that is definitely increased since COVID, when that supply was just so tight. You didn't know what you were going to get, so people filled their freezer and found that, hey, this is the way to do it.
yeah,
And it was
that's
a
a true.
wild time during COVID when meat prices skyrocketed. You couldn't find hamburger on the shelves. These packers went from being 1 to 2 months out, or the butchers went from being 1 to 2 months out to being 6, 8, 10, 12 months out. I mean, everybody
Holy
was like,
cow!
"Yep, this is the way to do it," and it really helped kickstart that industry of buying direct from farmer.
Yeah, and I know some guys, down by Atchison here. I mean, they really depend on that for their farm's livelihood, basically, to be able to market that to the end user. I mean, they're a smaller farm, just so they can do it and stay alive. That's what they do. They market it to the end user, and that's how they collect a little bit more of a margin and a premium over the grocery store. So it really, I mean, helps people stay afloat.
Yeah, yeah. We're a little late. We're a little late to the game, but I think we finally we decided to go ahead and do that. I tell you, during COVID, like you said, Brandon, you couldn't find hamburger meat on the grocery shelf, or anything else. What you could find, though, you could find tomahawks, and you could find the high end wagyu, because that was super expensive. Because I would go through the grocery store, especially during COVID, and I would I'd roll in there every other day, and you know seeing what's truly on the shelf, because you hear like, oh, shelves are bare, this that, and you go in, a lot of canned goods were gone, and all the chicken, like you couldn't find, you could not find a piece of chicken, to save your life, even chicken nuggets, and but that corned beef hash is still on the shelf, that spam still on the shelf. So I was like, okay, well, people aren't hungry yet, right? People aren't that hungry yet because this is still it's still on the shelf. Yeah, man, but all the ground beef is gone. Like that thing that was gone like day one. It didn't show back up for a while. It would have
Or
been nice to
depending
be
on
able
where
to.
you're at, it's still like that. I mean, I've done quite a bit
Oh,
of
that's true.
traveling here in the last couple months, and fortunately, out here where I'm at, we have a lot of farms. We have a lot of cattle, a lot of buffalo, chicken, stuff like that. A lot of pork. So we have several farms. We have one that's the pork shop. That's all they do. It's just locally sourced pork, and you go there and you get fresh cuts, and it's fantastic. And like Jarrett mentioned, they're able to make a little bit more of a margin, and I still pay less than what I would pay at the grocery store. But for the most part, and I'm assuming this is with the packers and the distributors, uh, our grocery stores are pretty full. But I was back in Maryland a couple weeks ago, and you walk in the Safeway, zero chicken. Your ground beef, the only thing that was left was like the 93% fat free ground beef. But a lot of those places, man, and you hate to inject politics into this, but this is just what I see and what I observe. When you go to those bigger blue cities, for the most part, like shelves are empty, and it makes me wonder how many of those folks like that's just the new norm. Like this is just the way it's going to be, and it makes it even tougher and tougher for me to leave, Arizona and go travel to some of those places. Because man, I remember like our big thing here, like we were never short on meat. It was eggs. I remember needing to go get like a dozen eggs, and it was like $11 for like a dozen eggs. I'm like, I'm almost paying $1 an egg, man. My boy's like, oh, I got a little eggshell in there. We'll throw it away. No bullshit. You scoop that damn eggshell out of that thing. We got to cook that thing. That's $1, man.
It's wild how much the inflation hit the eggs. But I mean, there are still local guys around here selling them. Go to the grocery store, it's $8-10, and the guy down the street says, "You want them? $3." Not they're not trying to make all the profit in it. So it's nice to get to deal with those guys and help them out as much as you can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, eggs, man, eggs really, really skyrocketed. My parents have some chickens. They got some Rhode Island Reds, and man, we were buying eggs at the grocery store. $10 a dozen. It was like, man, I would actually burn the gas to drive down to South Georgia to come back with 10 dozen free eggs. Because man, the grocery store is crazy expensive. Uh, Absolute crazy expensive. So
Josh was the Smokey and the Bandit of egg hauling.
that's right. Hey man, that's right.
Cannonball
I
run,
gotta
baby.
I have no shame. It'll be like that. It'd be like one of those trips out to your guys' place where we drove out and then drove back and hauling a couple $100 worth of booze in the car. Because
Allegedly.
yeah, allegedly. So to kind of off the off the farming stuff, but Roger, this where Brandon lives is another place in the country, contrary to Texas where Luke lives, because Luke claims there's no Weller Special Reserve on the shelf in Texas. He can't find it, even though everybody else can find it. I don't know if Luke's colorblind and he can't see reds and greens, or what. But Brandon and Jarrett live in an area that is swimming in Weller Special Reserve. Like it is all over the place. It's absolutely crazy. It is
Well,
absolutely
he ought to be
insane.
swimming in some MGP products, but obviously he's not. So we got to coach him along on this thing. It's like, hey man,
Yeah,
hook a brother
right.
up.
Nah, dude, this guy, dude, Brandon gets it. So, uh, I tell you, we went out, and our listeners have heard me talk about this. So, we went out to Kansas for a few weddings, and so the one where I did not intend for that girl to start crying after I talked to her, but I made her cry. That was Brandon's younger sister's wedding, where I made the girl cry, and but at Brandon's wedding, he had what was that, the Volstead,
Yep, the
Oh yeah,
Remus Volstead.
yeah.
dude.
That's a nice case too.
It is
Oh,
super bougie.
fantastic.
Easily top 5 bourbon I've had in my life. Easy. It was absolutely phenomenal. Um, so Brandon, always be on the hunt, man. If you see one, just tell me how much I owe you. Um, I'll
Absolutely.
Venmo to you right then. Still looking for one. You can't find any Remus back here. There is none in North Carolina. But so hopefully it comes back out there, man. But it did get popular.
It,
Um,
It did. When they went from 4 to 5, they got quite a few cases of 5 in, and they had it in stock for a little bit until all the out of towners figured out that, oh yeah, this Remus 5 is real good, and it flew right off the shelf because they were getting cases of this stuff in. When the 5 came out, there was actually still 3 or 4 cases of Remus 2, so 3 years previous, that was still out there. 6 came around, they got like 4 bottles of it. And the allocations dried up quick, fast, and in a hurry.
And that's crazy. You were literally right there at the spigot.
Yeah, I drive by MGP to get to the liquor store.
Oh man, dude, that's absolutely nuts. You get some good stuff out there though. You snagged that Weller Full Proof, a Stag, a couple, and some cigar. Those
Dude,
cigar
I
blends, man.
saw-
I
I
can't wait to get
saw-
that cigar blend.
I saw the new Stag. I was in Atlanta, and there's this little crap hole liquor store. I walk in there. I was like, oh, okay, they got Stag. I mean, how much? How much was about $2.99? I mean, yeah, that thing is going to sit on the shelf at $2.99. Ain't gonna happen.
So the secret that I found with Atlanta is you have to go in the neighborhood where you don't blend in
That's the whole city.
because, well, okay, touche. But like you got to go into the real neighborhood. I'm talking about the real neighborhood that you don't blend in, and you just got to walk in there because people are going to look at you. And they're going to be like, "That dude's either crazy or he's a cop. Either way, it's a trap. Don't mess with him." Because a lot of times they don't know what they have, and the people shopping at that store, they're not buying Stag, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
They don't, I pulled 2 Stag Juniors out of Atlanta, out of a store near the airport. That, like, even in my days in Iraq, I felt safer in Mosul in 05 than I did in this store. But at the end of the day, like people looked at me like I was crazy, but nobody messed with me because they're like, I'm not sure, man. Like this could be a trap. This could definitely be a trap. So, but all right. So I think that's going to wrap it up for us. Jared, I got one last question for you. Are you ready for your antelope hunt?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I was actually just looking at spots today. I mean, that's going to be a big I think we're a month out, right at a month out. So, heading to Wyoming. I'm going to go see what I can do. I mean, I'm going to go knock it down with the best of them, see if I can get one. So, but yeah, no, I'm pumped. It'll be a fun trip.
That's awesome, man. Dude, good luck on that. That is, I will be living vicariously through you while you're on that, and hopefully next year I won't get skunked again on the permit draw for your guys' area. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But at the end of the day,
plenty of whitetail down here.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, at some point, even if we do, we need to figure out. We need to go on a buffalo hunt somewhere, or go on a hog hunt. Yeah, we need to do something. So, all right. Well, that's going to do it for us here at Culper's Canteen Cup. Once again, Luke, I hope your dog is finally adopted. Right. I hope I hope this is the final process since you couldn't make it tonight because apparently a lot of dog adoption paperwork and stuff is going on Saturday evenings in the middle of nowhere, Texas. But for those of you that are listening, we appreciate it. Again, everything that you can, the most precious thing you can give us is your time, and we really appreciate that. I'll kick it over to Roger in just a second. The only shout out I have is Damon. Hey man, we're praying for you. We hope you're on a road to recovery. Hang in there, keep fighting. Don't give up. And that's gonna do it for me. Roger, what you got?
So I'm jealous. So I drive an F-250 diesel. So reefer fuel and what I buy, I pay taxes on my diesel. What's the difference? Is it just the dye? Like if I just run straight reefer fuel through my truck, am I good? I would never do that. I would pay the tax because that's what the government wants me to do. But I'm just saying, like if I had a buddy that was just using reefer fuel on their truck, I mean, am I good with that? It's just a dye.
Oh, it's not going to hurt your truck. It's going to hurt your wallet if you ever get your tank dipped. They frown upon that one heavily.
Right, but what are the odds of like now I get it if I had like a commercial F-450 this and that or whatever or like what you guys are driving, but my like POV F-250? What are the odds of me actually getting my tank dipped?
Low, very low. Not
I've
going to
never heard
advise
of
that
it.
one, but I don't know of anybody personally that's ever had it happen to them. I'm sure when I think I heard when fuel prices started getting up in the $5 range, they started dipping a lot more tanks, and
Gotcha.
it's really easy to tell if you've been running the red. It sticks around for a long time.
I
Well,
heard Brandon say do it.
hey man. Well, you know what? I mean, here, but you know
I'm
what?
not a lawyer.
Here's the thing though. I've actually given some thought to this. Again, I pay my taxes like I'm supposed to, and then some. But it's like, one, I think I have a Fourth Amendment right. So they better have some probable cause, like actually see me hit the reefer button on the tank. And two, I can use reefer fuel in my truck if I'm using it for farm use. So if I'm legitimately using that, and then theoretically I go refill it back up with, the government tax diesel, like you said, that the stuff hangs out for. I'd be kind of curious. I'm gonna have to do some gurgle on this thing. I'm not going down that road because I'm not trying to go to jail for, you know, $4 worth of diesel or $5 worth of diesel. But my last question. So either you guys on Farmers Only? I had to ask.
Both of us are
I
happily
didn't ever get
married,
the
so
yeah didn't ever get the pleasure of getting onto Farmers Only. I should have checked it out in my single days.
I'm just curious, man. I've seen the commercials. I'm like, do farmers really hop on that? I'm
The
like,
hell is that?
you know what? It's like your grinder thing that you hop on. Same thing for farmers.
Oh, what?
It's all good.
That was
But no.
good. That was good.
Hey, thanks, Brandon and Jarrett, for your time. And again, this is, for our listeners out there, this is when we talk about the PPI, the producer, this is where a lot of those prices and stuff come from. And hopefully we were able to educate you folks, or hopefully Brandon and Jarrett were able to educate you folks on there a little bit about their processes. And hopefully, we heard a little bit from Jarrett, but hopefully the crystal ball shows some prices coming down over the next couple of years. But I have a feeling in the next year or so that's probably not going to be the case. But anyway, for our listeners out there, thanks again for your time. Shout out to everybody that listens to us. Shout out to everybody that watches us. Hopefully we stay up on YouTube for a little bit, but keep your canteen cups tightly secured and full of some good whiskey.